All right, this is your Gaza War Sit Rep day 119. This is military analysis that seeks to understand guerrilla warfare and does not disdain Arab military capacities. Today's topic is the little bit of ceasefire theater that we've experienced over the past 48 hours or so. But first, we'll talk about the news, which is of the United States attacking targets in Syria and Iraq. Apparently, this is in retaliation against the Iraqi Kataib Hezbollah hitting a U.S. base, the tri-border base connected to Atanf in Syria, utterly illegal occupying base in Syria, on the Iraq border as well. The Iraqis do not want the Americans in Iraq and have not ever wanted them in Iraq, but they have been asked to leave and told they weren't. And they said they weren't leaving. There's some ongoing negotiation about whether they are going to leave or not. And then Jordan, the United States is invited by Jordan, by the king of Jordan, who gives the Americans permission to have the base in their part, which is why the Americans claim that it was in Jordan. The Jordanians claim that it was not. The strike that killed the 3 U.S. servicemen and injured 30 others several days ago. So the United States was talking about retaliating against Iran. What we heard is that they asked Iran if it would be okay if they could bomb Iran, and Iran said no. And so now they're bombing Syria and Iraq. They've killed people already. They've bombed all over Syria and all over Iraq, where they have bases, and they're bombing. Presumably they've given the armed groups in those countries warning, but they have killed people. Apparently 85 targets, 151 bombs have been dropped. The Jordanian Air Force apparently helped. Apparently ISIS also has attacked the Iraqi armed forces. There have been deaths, both civilian and military, from Iraq and Syria as a result of the American attacks. The Iraqi resistance simultaneously has hit a U.S. base in Konoko, Syria, at the exact same time as the U.S. was striking Syria and Iraq. The Iraqi resistance also hit Haifa. The Yemen, we might as well just skip right to the Yemen. The Al-Ansarullah, they also hit the port of Eilat with ballistic missiles and drove another British ship away from the Red Sea with attacks. So the Yemen front is as active as ever. Iraq and Syria are being bombed by the Americans, and they are hitting targets in Syria and in Israel at the same time. There's been a statement by the president of Iran who said, reminded listeners that the U.S. used to say, you used to hear this refrain, people who, I know YouTube viewers of this channel are, generally speaking, not youthful, at least physically. I know you're all young at heart, but old enough probably to remember the constant refrain by Obama, by Trump spokespeople, by, who was it before Obama? Bush. All these presidents used to say all options are on the table with regards to Iran. All options are on the table. And the president of Iran said, you remember when they used to say all options are on the table? And now they're saying we don't want war with Iran. So that's an interesting point, and an interesting historical point for people who are old enough to remember. Speaking of things the U.S. says, there's a poll published by the Associated Press. Let's take a look. I saw it, as always, on Aria's feed, and it's an interesting poll. It differentiates the Americans from the American popular opinion from Israeli. 50% of US adults think that the Israelis have gone too far. 31% said it's about right, and 15% said it's not far enough. So that 50% who say it's gone too far in America compares with Israel, where it's under 2%. So in Israel, 98% of people think Israel hasn't used enough firepower. In America, 46% think it's either gone far enough or about right, or not far enough. Now, the Republicans are a little more warlike than the Democrats. Only 33% of Republicans think it's gone too far. A big majority think it's either about right or not far enough. But on the Democrat side, 63% think it's gone too far. So not that public opinion matters all that much in policymaking, especially foreign policymaking, as you probably know, but something politicians do watch. They do watch the polls, whether they listen to the polls or not. So we covered Syria, we covered Iraq, we covered the bombings, the mutual bombings, statements from Iran, and Yemen still active. Now, a couple of other notes in on the Gaza front itself before we talk about this ceasefire business. In Gaza, there have been some big attacks in Gaza City. You're seeing lots of D9 bulldozers, lots of tanks, lots of armored personnel carriers being hit. Actually, not so many armored personnel carriers because it's tanks and it's D9s, probably because of the drawdown of actual troops. You're seeing these in Gaza City. You're seeing a tempo rising in terms of attacks by the resistance on Israeli targets, military targets in Gaza City, as well as I've mentioned before in previous sit reps, lots of attacks around Khan Yunis. You may have seen a video of the resistance hitting a D9 bulldozer directly as it crashes through some makeshift housing. It gets hit directly by one of the Yasin 105s. But the other major thing that we saw today, a report by Qassam, Hamas's armed wing, which says that they clashed with an Israeli force and eliminated 15 soldiers from point blank range west of Gaza City. So that's another big loss for the Israeli military in a single ambush to lose 15 men and probably others wounded. I'm sure we'll be hearing more details on that, possibly video in the coming days, but that's the report. Okay, I think that covers, in terms of the Hezbollah front, the front, there was a statement by Yoav Gallant. He's the one who said human animals, you remember that official, and he said, even if we have a ceasefire with Gaza, we're going to keep fighting in the north until people can go back to the north, to the border with Lebanon. So again, how do you parse that? Is that fake news hinting at a ceasefire? Possibly. Hard to interpret exactly what they're doing there. There was a Channel 13 special video talking about how every hospital in Israel in the north has underground tunnels and has plans for power outages. So they do have military tunnels under Israeli hospitals, even though they don't have them under Palestinian hospitals, despite the Israelis looking for them and destroying every Palestinian hospital in Gaza, supposedly to look for these tunnels. Israel does have them. So now the ceasefire psychological operation, because I think that's what we have to understand it as. What happened was, about 2 days ago, the spokesman of the Qatari foreign ministry made a statement in the United States at Johns Hopkins University, I guess. And this was again on Arya's feed. And the Qatari foreign minister told people that we have achieved preliminary agreement in Paris. The Israelis have agreed, and now the Hamas has agreed on a preliminary basis. And that Qatari official was saying something that was not true. Hamas had not agreed. And then so Hamas ended up coming out and saying, no, we have not agreed. Hamas has not, the delegation has not even traveled to Egypt. We've not delivered a final response. We're deliberating. No agreement has been reached yet. And then they had to make other statements saying, we won't agree unless there's a full withdrawal from Gaza. We won't agree unless there's complete access to humanitarian aid, complete access to rebuilding. So they're not going to agree. They did not have the Israeli deal that they were offered didn't have any of that stuff. The Israeli deal said basically, we'll cease fire for you to give us our prisoners back, and then we'll continue to bomb you to oblivion without now having to worry about our prisoners. And Hamas did not agree to that. And they are not going to agree to that, because why would they agree to that? So the devastating part of this was that the Qatari foreign minister created this hope. I mean, the foreign minister, the spokesperson, by announcing this preliminary agreement, they created this hope. They created this feeling from Palestinians that in Gaza that there was going to be some relief, that there was going to be a ceasefire. And now it makes Hamas look bad, because Hamas is going to be the one who's not agreeing to it. But Hamas has no reason to agree to a ceasefire that's just a pause that's going to end up giving Israel all the advantages to resume the genocide in full force. So that's Cena on his feed, on his Twitter feed, he said, it could be a colossal psyop, a psychological operation. And I think after 2 days now, I think that's the only conclusion we can come to, that this whole thing was to create more despair, because you can only really despair if you've had a little bit of hope, right? The possibility that this might be over. Everybody had this exalted feeling like maybe this is all going to be over, this genocide's going to be over. And then it was snatched away, because what Israel was offering was the same garbage deal that nobody could ever accept. And it was Qatar that was saying that Hamas, and that they had come to a deal that was acceptable. You guys were probably listening a couple of days ago when John and I were talking, and it was, we were reluctantly coming to the conclusion that Israel's not ready to make the kind of deal that would be needed to end this conflict. They're not ready to give all for all. They're not ready to give up all the thousands of Palestinian prisoners that they're holding and torturing in their prisons. They're not ready to talk about giving some of the land that they stole back in the Negev, the land that those Gaza refugees were expelled from. They're not ready to talk about no longer confining those people of Gaza to that tiny strip. They're talking about recolonizing it. They're talking about shrinking it. They're not talking about giving those people freedom of movement, ending the siege, giving those people all the same rights that every other human being is entitled to. So this ceasefire little leak that happened over the over this week was, I think I would conclude, a psychological operation, a psyop, intended to make people despair. And because of that, I think it's probably a good time to review a very underrated, I guess, Palestinian resistance figure named Nizar Banat. And Nizar Banat was a political activist, and he wrote a kind of he wrote he wrote guidelines for how to do how to behave in the media, how to behave relative to media, how to conduct media struggle. And I've read them so many times, but I don't know. You won't be surprised to hear that they're not super easy to find on through Google or search engines. But let me see if I can search them up on one of the feeds that that I follow. And okay, it wasn't Nisar Banat. It was Basel al-Araj. Okay, I found it. So Basel al-Araj, he wrote a guide on how to behave in the media. So I found it. I'll just show you where I found it before I read some of it to you. This is on Eye in Paradise. I don't know anything about this feed. I just know that they posted this by Basel al-Araj, and here's some of what he says. Never spread the occupation's propaganda and do not contribute to instilling a sense of defeat. Never spread panic, be supportive of the resistance, and do not spread any news broadcast by the occupation. Forget about the ethics and impartiality of journalism. Just as the Zionist journalist is a fighter, so are you. I'm not endorsing these guidelines, okay? I just want to be clear. I'm just saying this is what Palestinian resistance, let's say media, a Palestinian resistance media activist who I think was murdered by the Israelis, wrote about how to think about engaging in media work in this context. And I'm just sharing it with you because I think it's of historical interest, of course. So do not measure success against conventional wars. The battle is judged by the overall outcome. Our direct human and material losses will be much greater than the enemy's, which is natural in guerrilla wars that rely on willpower, the human element, and the extent of patience and endurance. Today's wars are no longer just wars and clashes between armies, but rather are struggles between societies. There's a little bit more too. I think I seem to remember some other stuff that he said, but this is the point. The point is the information war and the psychological warfare that's conducted includes operations like saying there's going to be a ceasefire so that hope can be snatched away, and creating these scenes of humiliation that we've seen so many examples of, right? And these scenes of destruction, and these scenes of trying to create a sense of there's no limits, right? Like they'll go into these they're willing to go into these hospitals, they're willing to kill children, they celebrate the killing of children on videos and mock their victims, and nobody can do anything about it. And that's like, all of that is intended to create a feeling of despair, a feeling of helplessness. And that's why they made these arguments against defeatism. That's why they also, a lot of the behavior that they suggest, a lot of the behavior that these kinds of resistance figures of the very recent past, suggest in terms of what to listen to, what types of media to consume, what to know, to how to analyze what kinds of operations may be at work. They're all based on that kind of understanding, the kind of understanding that there's a material battle going on, a guerrilla war going on, a war of attrition, as I've talked about many times, where the Palestinian resistance is trying to destroy specifically the ability of the Israeli military to wage this war by attacking their tanks and bulldozers and armored vehicles and hitting their officers and their clusters of troops. There's the material aspect of this war, and there's the propaganda side of this war, the psychological side of this war, where I think Western armies, and including the Israelis, are really tuned in to how to do this, and they believe that they can win on the psychological terrain, even if they're not winning on the material terrain, even if they're not winning the guerrilla war, or meeting their objectives in the guerrilla war. If they can demoralize and induce enough despair and hopelessness, then it doesn't matter, because they can win this, they can get the surrender that they're looking for. And this, in this case, is achieved through an intermediary, namely the Qatari mediators, who are supposed to be the honest brokers of this deal. And now it's, in a sense, it's another card that they've burned, where they've used their honest broker in this psychological operation, which damages the trust that one would think, will need when they do negotiate a deal. Of course, not negotiating a deal and not honoring the deals that they've negotiated has also been a staple of Western and US and Israeli warfare models for the past several centuries. So that's it. That's all I wanted to talk about tonight. I wanted to talk about, we had to talk about the headlines of the US strikes on Iraq and Syria, but the main issue I wanted to talk about was this 48 hours of hope and despair that we just went through, this little roller coaster, and to kind of warn against this type of roller coaster effect going forward, and to know now that we've been exposed to it, now that we've been fooled by it once, to know that it could be done again. So how do you know that there's a ceasefire deal? Well, you don't know it from a little leak from the Qatari side. That's not going to be good enough going forward. All right, I'll stop there. I'll see you in the next sit rep. Please like and subscribe and comment, etc. It's all very helpful. And thank you all for coming.